How do you go about describing stakes in literary fiction? My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. The question actually says, do these 5 questions when we were talking about querying still apply to literary fiction? And so this is where I say you have to have 5 questions answered at the end of a query letter. That is, who is your main character? What do they want? What are they willing to do to get it? What is standing in their way? And what happens if they fail? And if you are looking at something like an epic high fantasy, those questions feel really obvious because the stakes are really big and brash and in your face. We are talking about fates of nations. We are talking about things that are very obvious on the page. But there are a lot of genres in which the stakes are not necessarily so obvious. And even if they are obvious, they are much quieter. They are much more intimate. They don't feel as big. They don't feel as weighty. But just because something is intimate doesn't make it less important or less weighty. I mean, let's go and talk about like young adult romance. When you were 16 years old and you were falling in love for the first time, that felt like the most important thing in the universe. And the books that are speaking to that audience and to that experience should still feel like it is important and it should still feel weighty. So here's the black cover blurb for Kristen Arnett's Mostly Dead Things. I don't read a ton of literary fiction, but I have been trying to amp up my consumption of literary fiction recently, and this is one that I think did a lot of things that a lot of people are often asking about in my comment section with regards to literary fiction. And so I'm going to end up using this example kind of a lot because it speaks to a lot of the things that people have been asking about. All right, so let's take a look at this blurb. What does it take to come back to life? For Jessalyn Morton, the question is not an abstract one. In the wake of her father's suicide, Jessa has stepped up to manage his failing taxidermy business while the rest of the Morton family crumbles. Her mother starts sneaking into the taxidermy shop to make provocative animal art while her brother, Milo, withdraws. And Bryn, Milo's wife, and the only person Jessa's ever been in love with, walks out without a word. It's not until the Mortons reach a tipping point that the string of unexpected incidents begins to open up surprising possibilities and second chances. But will they be enough to salvage this family to help them find their way back to one another? Okay, and then we go on to talk a little bit about the author and like some like trope type things in literary fiction. So let's answer those 5 questions. Who's our main character? It's Jessalyn Morton. What is it that she wants? She wants to come back to life. So basically, she wants to work through her grief. She wants to feel something good again. That is very small stakes indeed. This is literally one woman wants to not feel as sad and broken anymore. That is as intimate and as personal as it gets. What is she willing to do to get it? She is trying to hold the family together. She is trying to rebuild relationships that seem like they are broken. What is standing in her way? Everybody else is also a mess and is dealing with this grief in also unhealthy ways. So she is trying to piece together something that doesn't want to be held together because not everybody's moving through this at the same pace. And what happens if she fails? The family stays fallen apart in a very serious way. This is not just her relationship with her and her brother, but it's also her brother's relationship with his wife, who is also her girlfriend. So this is a very messy set of circumstances, but they will stay broken, they will stay splintered if they can't work through their grief. And Jessa's the one that you, or Jessalyn, is the one that you see all of this through. Even in fantasy, we have cozy fantasy in which you can have very small, very intimate stakes indeed. This is for Legends and Lattes, which is probably the most famous cozy fantasy that has come out in recent years. So after a lifetime of bounties and bloodshed, Viv is hanging up her sword for the last time. So we are doing the opposite of what most fantasy queries do. So instead of a person picking up a sword and going into battle for the first time, we are done with that. We are putting that behind us, and we are instead moving on to retirement, to a quieter life. The battle-weary orc aims to start fresh, opening the first ever coffee shop in the city of Thune, but old and new rivals stand in the way of success, not to mention the fact that no one has the faintest idea what coffee actually is. If Viv wants to put the blade behind her and make her plans a reality, she won't be able to go at it alone, but the true rewards of the uncharted path are the travelers you meet along the way. And whether drawn together by magic, pastry, or freshly brewed cup, they become partners, family, and something deeper. Okay, so let's look at those 5 questions. Who is our main character? Viv. What is it that she wants? To run a coffee shop and not be a warrior anymore. What is she willing to do to get it? So she is going to teach people what coffee is. She's going to deal with all of her rivals around the city. What is standing in her way? Those rivals, the fact that nobody knows. So like the things that she's willing to do and what is standing in her way become one and the same. This is a small story. It's an intimate story. So then she's going to also have to make some friends. She can't do this alone. So we see people often trying to say like, oh, this is a story about found family, or you could just show us that in the writing. Rather than telling these themes up front, you could show it in the way that you are telling the story, in the way that you are laying those stakes out. Okay, so then what happens if she fails? That isn't as explicitly on the page, but it is heavily implied that she will be lonely, she will not have a purpose in her retirement, and she might end up going back to the things that she didn't want to do anymore. That is also an aspect of these cozy stories, is that some of it is implied. It is only implied, though, if you successfully show us what is happening up until that point. If you are being too telly and focusing way too much on all of the battles that came before, if you're focusing way too much on backstory and world building and all of those things, then we're not going to get the implicit storyline, those implicit stakes at the end here. You've got to really dial in and lead us right up to the edge if you're going to imply, or else she will be sad at the end of it. You're going to have to get us very, very close with all of the rest of the stakes there.